Hello, everyone. This is EnerCom's Oil and Gas podcast, number 5, I believe, if we're taking count. I'm Glen Parrott with EnerCom, and with me today we've got my co-host, Mr. Vandeford, Aaron.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks again for being here. And today on the show, we're going to not only kind of just take a real quick look, wrapping up some of the information around, Q1 earnings, kind of the highlights and takeaways. But we're also, part of the podcast, we're introducing a new segment. It's going to be our Oilfield Tech and Innovation series. And we really want to focus today on artificial intelligence. And we've got a guest in the studio in EnerCom's global headquarters podcasting studio. Got a guest with us today, Tom Chikori. Welcome, Tom. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. But before we kind of get into pestering you, Tom, because I've got a bunch of newbie questions around artificial intelligence, I wanted to take a step back a little bit because we are right in the midst of wrapping up earnings for Q1 and oil and gas. Aaron, any highlights or takeaways that are kind of standing out to you as we...
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a busy Q1. Mm-hmm. We got a little bit more clarity from the Anadarko Occidental Chevron saga. And so that was kind of interesting to see. Not necessarily specific to Q1, but to kind of close the books a little bit on that. Anadarko, or Occidental, is now the lead steer and seemingly will be the group to close this thing out. And so I think having that clarity for folks has been good.
Vicky Hullop and Cedric Berger at Occidental are like my new heroes. I mean, in my mind, just because and we've talked about it on Oil and Gas 360, Chevron came in, hey, we're going to do this. And they're like, hey, you didn't listen to us. And they put together this deal and they've been hustling to get it done. And by gum, looks like this is going to happen for them.
They're going to get it done. And we're going to see them in August at our conference.
Right? I know. It's a little bit of a self-serving plug, right? Is that the Oil and Gas Conference is coming up this August. And it's the number one independent energy investor conference in the U.S. Shameless plug. But as you mentioned, not only were they the lead steer in this deal, they're going to be our Monday keynote address on August 12th.
I would say we had them lined up before this deal. So
we did, but
we knew something.
You know what? And such a great group of guys, they actually confirmed it. Even amidst all this work that they're doing currently with Anadarko and the whole Chevron deal and putting their deal together, they actually were very thoughtful enough to kind of say, hey, yeah, we're still going to be there.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that. But back to Q1, we got a lot of confirmation from the market that free cash flow is still a priority. And so companies that were either increasing CapEx for the year or came in heavy or light on production really did pay the price. And so I think the market certainly was very clear and definitely doled out its punishment for those companies that didn't take that to heart.
I'm looking at a thing from Tudor Pickering. It was a write-up in Bloomberg that they covered at the beginning of the month. For the love of God, stop raising budgets.
It's a good title.
and that is the message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Listen to what we're asking you to listen to.
Yeah, and so to that effect, we saw gas prices coming into the summer starting to weaken, and so we did a little bit of looking through Q1 and pointed out that guys like Chesapeake and EQT and Silverbow, Southwestern, Antero, all deciding to kind of step back on some of their rig programs for the year already.
Right, shutting them down.
And so I think that's all in the spirit of conserving capital, making sure that we're being good stewards of that capital. And so, those decisions weren't necessarily punished. It was, reinforced on the other side when folks are saying, hey, we are going to be good stewards of this capital. Here's what our plan is. And it's not grow at any cost.
if you're I guess a larger firm, even a larger small cap, but if you're a sort of a smaller guy, you need to, you know, put down a rig. That's pretty impactful for you. And how do you balance out that decision of saying, okay, well, crap, the only way I'm going to get to where my investors want is if I actually step down a rig.
Step down, yeah. And to the other side of that, the important considerations when you decide to say, hey, we're going to step back and do a rig is, what are the associated costs for putting one back to work?
Right.
That it's not just a lever of, hey, we're going to stop and start. There's some real costs associated with, all right, now we're going to go ramp back up into a program. Those have to be thought of as they kind of go through this decision-making process. But I thought that was an interesting kind of highlight that came out of it. I would say overall, operationally, companies were very strong. A lot of production beats from analyst estimates, meaning that we've dialed in a lot of this production. We know what we're doing in the field. If prices are going to go down on the gas side, particularly, then efficiencies has to be the name of the game again. And not that it wasn't before, but it'll play into some of our conversation on technology coming up. We're looking at everything. Everything's still on the table to find these efficiencies and get oil and gas out of the ground for less dollars.
And in a way that the investors are seeing that benefit, and they're seeing free cash, they're seeing hopefully a reduction in expense.
Yeah, and I should say, in all fairness, there's two sides to that. There's for less cost, or how can we get more production out of that? And I'm willing to spend a little bit more for that.
Yeah.
And so as we think about allocating some money to furthering science, it may be in the name of recovering more out of these reservoirs.
And I think that for these companies, right? They're kind of balancing out, hey, how do I accomplish this and still, if not rewarded by investors, at least not punished. And ultimately, I think they've got to be very proactive on their messaging, so that people clearly understand what that strategy is, so that they aren't punished on the downside, but it's acceptable. So that's for what it's worth. Alrighty. So that said, let's get to the sort of the meat of what we really wanted to have a chat about today, and that was oilfield technology. So the Oilfield Tech and Innovation Series is really it's an outcropping from EnerCom's initial Oilfield Tech and Innovation Conference, and those are conferences we had in 2017, 2018, and it was really designed as a platform to really acknowledge this impact of technology at the bit or in the data structuring around it, and not necessarily how they do their social media, but the really hardcore stuff. And that was very well received generally. And so at our last EnerCom Dallas conference, Tom Chikuri, founder of Innovation Illustrated, which is an AI consulting firm, presented. And number one, I really appreciate that. So Tom, first and foremost, yet again, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And kind of before we kind of dive into the meat of all this, I'm just kind of curious. Let's, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you kind of get into AI? I mean, is that your degree, or is that a degree, or what? Give me some context here.
Oh, yeah. My degree is computer science. That's my bachelor's.
That makes sense.
And my master's is in business administration. So I have an MBA and a BSc in computer science. I got into AI in college. I was part of a research lab where we worked on Johnson Space Center's projects.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yes. And one of the projects we worked on was the Star Mast project at NASA, and part of it was building an expert system and to connect data and as part of that, I was part of a team that built what was called the Knowledge Bond Tool, KBT, and that was used to harvest data and analyze data and see how data is connected.
Was it?
That's how I got into it.
I mean, you're not an old guy. I mean, was that sort of, I won't say the infancy of AI, or has AI been around a long time?
Oh, it's been around a long time. It's just that was in the mid '90s when we were working on that project.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I.
Has it changed a lot since then?
Oh yeah, it has. It has. The approaches we were using at that time to try and having computers model human thinking and human intelligence are very different from what are being used right now. Back then, we're trying to feed the computer all we know about the world.
Right.
Whereas right now, we pretty much just show the computer a whole bunch of cat pictures, and the computer tells us that's a cat. Before, we're trying to tell the computer what a cat looks like and what all its features and all that, so that the computer can detect a cat. And now it's changed to a point where it's all about the algorithm, which is the computer process for example, in this case, detecting a cat being the same. And basically you just feed it lots of data to be able to make certain identifications.
To extrapolate that new solution.
Yes. If you look at it that way, yeah.
I don't know anything about artificial intelligence at all. I barely have any intelligence to begin with, so
Maybe we could use some.
Yeah,
but we do. It's obviously a topic that is evolving across industries, but in ours, in oil and gas, it's something that, it was big data, and big data is still there. AI is kind of now another term that's popping up in all these investment presentations, and providing that framework. And I think, Tom, you and I have talked over the past little bit, but even over the past year, kind of what AI is doing, kind of what you're doing within it has kind of shifted, and it seems like it's a pretty fast moving space.
Now, and not to interrupt on that, but you were prior to this. I mean, you're experienced on IBM Watson, right?
Yes.
Because in my mind, IBM, sort of that Watson technology was sort of the first, public experience I think people had with AI, in that, it's on jeopardy, right? The broad masses are seeing this computer take information, verbal information, and process it and come up with an answer. Now, and so when I think of AI, and I think of IBM as kind of the big dog in the space. So your experience with it, and you were using that, right?
Yes.
To apply it in the oil field.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I'll go several steps back, and so I can paint the full story on AI. So I started in 2007. I built a startup that was working on social media intelligence.
Really?
Basically, we were one of the very first companies to mine social media for use by corporations to determine what people are saying, whether they're saying good things or bad things about their
So
product.
Zuckerberg has that now, right?
Oh yeah. So that was around 2008, and one of the products that we leveraged for processing text was called Alchemy API, and it's a local Denver company. That company was acquired by IBM, and it became a core part of the Watson offering.
Oh, okay.
And so fast forward several years later, when I started Innovation Illustrated consulting, it was just a natural progression for me to work on IBM Watson, because I had the background on working with its core offering.
Gotcha.
And so that's how I started working on the Watson.
Excellent. And how? So you're working on that. How did you? Can you talk about the flow tech component of this? What you were doing there?
Oh yeah. So with Flowtech, we were working on multiple projects that leverage the Watson platform. The first one was the Reservoir Cognitive Consultant, and basically it was to use AI to determine efficacy of product, and also use AI to advise in the most optimum combination of products and decisions and strategy for drilling a well and for deploying the Flowtech products. And the third part of that was the knowledge as a knowledge base. So you could ask the system that we build certain specific questions about the well, about the company's products, and it would work like a Siri or
Really?
like an Alexa, and it was very educational from that standpoint. And the last part was for electrical submersible pumps, where we use for predictive maintenance. So the idea was to all the parts that constitute an ESP. As we are pulling and installing them, we are recording all that information with AI, and we can do predictive. We can predict when a part is going to fail,
right? Yeah.
and how long it's going to take to turn around. So it was that kind of.
Because I've heard that being applied on the sort of the offshore platforms and down at the BOP, right? Like coming out of 10 years past Macondo now, of having these parts now say, hey, I'm going to fail in 2 months or whatever. Is that kind of what you're?
Yes, that's the idea. That's the idea. So collecting all this data about a specific part and knowing where it's deployed, under what environment, and collecting all that data, you're able to predict when a part is most likely to fail and how long it takes to turn around in terms of replacing it, and also how long it takes in the supply chain, right, when you order it. So with all that information, you can say, hey, this part is most likely to fail a month from now. Start ordering a new part, right? And that way you can decrease your downtime,
right,
and the costs associated with that.
See, to me, that's a very real and practical application of artificial intelligence, because we were kind of talking about this before we, kind of got in here in the studio, but, we're at the point in my mind where the term itself of AI is at risk of being tossed into the sort of the buzzword heap along with, big data and predictive analytics. And mostly because it's always presented in this broad ephemeral concept that's tough to explain and show operational results and success. And I guess, so my question is, am I wrong on that? Because on the one hand, I like the idea of parts saying, hey, I'm going to fail. On the other hand, if an executive gets up during a presentation and says, hey, we're implementing AI, I don't know what that means.
So you're not wrong on that. I mean, I think it's an overused term in a way that's not productive for people, in a way that's not helpful at all right now. And part of it, I think, is largely to the fact that it's an abstract concept that's very difficult to grasp. And at the same time, there's not a lot of great knowledge sources about it for non-technology people. Right?
Or it's misinformation, maybe.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of great knowledge for data scientists and machine learning engineers and software engineers. But that next wave of education for the people who implement the technology, who manage the technology, and who make strategic decisions on the technologies is lacking right now. And that's a big part of what we're doing at Innovation Illustrated.
What you mentioned this, you just another, I don't want to say buzzword, but artificial intelligence. What's the difference between AI and machine learning? You used that term earlier, or the term's interchangeable, right? Is there a difference?
Yeah. So machine learning is a subset of AI. Okay. AI has many other different components. People have tended to use those two interchangeably. Right now, I advise people, if that helps you understand it a little bit better, use them interchangeably. Obviously, I don't want data scientists to be using them interchangeably because there's some fine details about it.
Well, isn't
But
that
for the ordinary person, I mean, if AI and machine learning, I'm okay with that interchanging right now.
Isn't that the cat example though you were giving me? Is the machine is learning this is a cat?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the ability for the machine to learn without being explicitly programmed, right? So programming, which is, as I was explaining earlier on, before we used to try and tell the machine everything about a cat, so that when we ask it to identify a cat, it's saying it's got eyes, it's got a nose, it's got fur, it's got all that, right? But how that progression happened in AI research is that maybe, you know what, maybe that's not necessary. Maybe we just need to show the machine as many cats as possible, and then it will learn what a cat looks like, right? And so that's the learning aspect of machine learning.
It sounds like people just being lazy.
Yeah.
Kidding. So going back, I guess, I said before, big data, because it always bothered me when a company or during a presentation, the guy saying, we're implementing big data, as if that's this panacea solution for operational efficiency or something, because it's sort of abstract. I'm very much I need to see the results. And when I think about AI, doesn't it depend upon companies already having massive amounts of data with multiple dimensions to it, and it's already sorted and configured appropriately? And doesn't it need to be structured first before you can apply artificial intelligence, or am I completely off on that?
So yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be structured. It needs to be clean.
Okay.
So that it can be fed into these algorithms. And the reason why I am of the opinion that it does not necessarily need to be structured, because if you use the right algorithms, you might start to find other connections within the data that you didn't know about, and that's what creates new insights. So you don't want to put too much structure to it.
Too much bias, right?
Yeah, up front, right?
Okay.
Because one benefit of having it clean, right? And obviously in some with minimal structure, like rows and columns, or that you see in like a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, right.
Just about that. And then from that, you can start to use different machine learning algorithms to say, hey, is there some insights here that I've never heard about, right? So and with these algorithms, they're able to analyze that data and surface new insights.
So I don't want to get away from the data perspective, because I think energy and oil and gas companies think of themselves as, I mean, they have a ton of data, right, a lot of things, but things are changing so fast. So how do we take this historical data, years and years of analog vertical wells, and apply it to, new concepts, new drilling, if those new concepts aren't necessarily in that data set today? Is that a struggle?
Yeah, I think what's lacking right now, and you alluded to this with AI being a buzzword, right? I think what's lacking right now is largely a framework for applying AI, and that's what we are doing at Innovation Illustrated. So we're approaching it from the challenge being, okay, you got all the data. Okay, then what are the use cases for me to apply this data? Right. So what is lacking right now is there's just a lot of examples out there, right? So when you go to a conference, you get a lot of examples of what other people are doing. But when you live that conference, like, how do I apply that to my organization? So what's needed right now is a framework that can help you get the way you make this business decisions today, and use that to apply to AI. Right, so we've built a framework, for example, that looks at AI as a strategic capability. And so when you start to look at a strategic capability, it's now just like any other strategic capability you use in your strategy making, right? And so when you do that now, you can find opportunities to apply AI in the value chain for how you deliver your product or your service to your customer. So that data now starts to become meaningful because you have meaningful objectives to apply it, and you can actually find places in your business processes and activities that your business undertakes in delivery of outcomes to customers. You can start to find places to apply that.
So as you think about, providing this framework, and I go back to our conversation with Kevin and the board, you have this, maybe a board of directors group that's saying, hey, we should be thinking about this, or maybe they're totally unaware of it, but they probably need this framework to be able to either decide, yes, we need to spend capital for doing this or not. And I know that's one of the things that you guys work on is providing that framework and providing that education to senior management or however. But maybe you can touch a little bit on that. But the question really becomes, what kind of culture have you seen, AI acceptance really work well? And is it a culture thing within a company to be an adopter?
Yeah. So what we see is that the most successful AI companies are the ones that embrace AI from the top. So from the executives, the CEOs being the sponsors. Because when you do that, then you have a straight path to tying AI to overall business strategy, right? We do see other companies where AI starts as a small project in the technology department or somewhere else, and then there's often struggles to then now tie all this cool stuff that you're able to demo and tie it now to some meaningful business strategy that impacts the bottom line, right? So from a cultural perspective, I say, hey, get your executives to buy in, right? And that's why we focus on educating the executives first. Because once they understand what it is, once they can tie it to business strategy, then more meaningful outcomes come from that.
So, and that's what we're heading into, is this specifically your company, Innovation Illustrated. So the first thing problem that you're trying to solve for them is to really work at the C-level or board level and educate them on how this can be beneficial to their overall strategy and profitability, presumably.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because we've seen those trends where sponsorship and adoption from the top, especially for a new concepts that's really that's proving difficult for a lot of people to grasp. Having the top executives understand it, most importantly, understand how it can be leveraged to impact in strategy making in order to impact the bottom line in the business or in the delivery of customer outcomes. We find that you have more successful implementations that way.
Okay. So what are the types of companies that you work with? Cross industry, or is it just oil and gas, or?
Our genesis was definitely in companies that have lots of data. As I was saying, started with a startup that I built that was doing social media intelligence, and that's largely because there's lots of data. So we're companies that have lots of data right now at a pretty significant advantage because you have a lot of assets to work with. And with AI, data is the asset. Right. So you have a lot of assets to work with. So as a result, you find for example, oil and gas, right, because of all the sensors and all the data that's being collected, it becomes a natural good starting point for AI projects. We are cross industry. Okay. We've worked with different types of projects, but the common thread there is largely around data right now. If If you have the data, if you have the assets, it's easier to start creating tangible strategies for your company right now. And if you don't have data, what we then do is advise how to start collecting data.
Yeah, that was my next
because
question.
that's pretty much the future there when we're looking at AI.
So on that front, I mean, I think of our small private equity backed guys who just got their first allocation. Maybe they, got 500 million. They're going to go start drilling their wells. What relevance does AI play in that company versus the Anadarko, Chevrons, Exxons of the world? Is there a role for both size companies?
Oh yeah. I mean, so for the bigger companies, they're sitting on a lot of data, right? Because there are a lot of deployments out there, sensors, and also historical data. So AI, and a lot of them are starting to adopt it. So it's just so much easier. But for the smaller company, I mean, there's a great deal of advantage in terms of the fact that with AI, you can now multiply your capabilities. So for a smaller organization, right, the ability to be able to get some data, whether it's public data or private data, limited data sets, right, and being able to do the work that in the past probably was needed like 10 people to do, you probably need 1 or 2 people to do it now. And now you can have those other people do other more meaningful things for your business. So being able to go from idea to action faster, or idea to product, to service faster, it puts those smaller companies in a field where they can play with the bigger companies.
Yeah, it can accelerate their involvement, I guess.
Yeah.
So, now, kind of going back a little bit to, like I said, you've got experience on Watson. So when you go into, you've sat down with the board, you sat down with management, and you've educated them on, what the opportunities are, and they say, yeah, you know what, we're going to engage with innovation and go forth. What is sort of the, platform that you use? Is it Watson?
And it depends. So if a company is already built on the IBM platform, we use Watson, but you have other companies that have invested in Amazon as a cloud, for example. So we use the Amazon tools. If you are in GC, Google Cloud, then we use Google. If you're in Azure, which is Microsoft Clouds, then we tend to use those tools. Also use some open source products that cut across the different platforms. So, for example, the Apache line of open source products can be used on all those platforms. And so that mitigates your risk in being tied to just one.
Is one better than another, or more capable, or is it really dependent upon? So as a simplistic analogy, I guess it would be, you've got Google spreadsheets versus Microsoft Excel, right? They're both spreadsheet applications, and they can both have their potentially strengths and weaknesses, and certainly preferences that people would have. So from an AI perspective, is there one that's like better than another functionally, or is that a weird question?
Yeah, no, it's not a weird question. It's we get that question a lot. It depends on what you want to do. Different platforms have different strengths, but the most important thing to realize is this: we just had like the Google conference and the Microsoft conference this past week, right? And they're announcing all these new products. So is companies embracing AI? These other platforms are still working on providing new products.
Right.
So there are constantly products being announced during a 12-month cycle. And so it's not, I mean, you can say one is at a disadvantage now over the other, but they're all constantly trying to keep up. I would say though, so for example, if you are in Azure, like Microsoft, and you got Office 365 and all that, it's probably and you have expertise with Microsoft, it's probably a good idea to just keep with that stack and leverage what Microsoft is providing. If you're already on Amazon doing other things on Amazon, it's probably a good idea. The same thing with IBM, because once you start to cross the platforms, you're now requiring different expertise, right? So you're just adding complexity where, at least for initial projects, that's unnecessary complexity because you have the skills in-house, leverage those.
Is that a question that management teams come up to you with and say, what should we be doing? I mean, they're looking to you as the expert, right?
Yeah.
So you come in obviously with some preferences, and you take a look at their environment, and then you make a recommendation, right?
Yeah. So our recommendation is based on what gives them the best outcome, right? And also what they're trying to optimize for. If they're trying to optimize for time to market, probably leveraging a lot of the capabilities and capacities that you currently have in-house.
Gotcha.
And that gets you time to market faster. And also if they're optimizing for cost, that's the same thing too. But then you also get companies that are trying to do something totally different.
I was going to ask you, can you walk us through a typical engagement? But based on what you just said, I don't know that there ever is a typical engagement. Maybe there is.
There's no typical engagement.
Yeah.
There's typical process that we go through.
Okay.
But the outcome that comes from there is less different. I'll give you an example. We just had a company this week in the energy industry where we are looking at certain public data in order to identify opportunities for specific predictions. I won't go into detail. But so it looked like a pretty standard vanilla, kind of solution.
Okay.
But when we did the analysis of the data, we later realized that how disparate it is, how inconsistent it is, and that fact alone was going to add 2 or 3 months.
Oh, really? Okay.
To the project, because we have to standardize it in some form. We're going to clean it, we're going to standardize it, and we got to look for the right dimensions in order to model it. So the process is the same. This process is standard, but the outcome for that differs from company to company, and it's largely based on, like you were asking a great question earlier on about data, right? It's largely based on the state of your data.
Right. Yeah, and that's again, and you were in my mind, if you go in there and that, as you just mentioned, the data is not exactly right, that's actually not a bad thing.
Yep.
I mean, ultimately, it may be longer on the time horizon, but at the end of it, the company's going to have a much better use and application of its data.
Oh yeah, and so that's one benefit. A second benefit I can add to that is that when you go through even just one early exercise with some of this AI project, that actually creates a habit in your organization on where you're lacking with your data, where in the process your data becomes dirty, where we're not collecting enough data, so we have too many holes in the data, and we're struggling to complete the data, the story of the data, right? So what those exercises do for you is actually start to instill these new habits and new culture in organizations with respect to valuing data as an asset.
Yeah.
And the impact it has, especially when you're applying when using AI.
Yeah, I think that would be very much a top-down, decision where companies, it's in effect, you're instituting a new standard operating procedure, not just habit, right? In other words, you're saying this is how we want our data to be and to look, and we're looking to you, employee, to facilitate that. But but it's not just us saying it to be, difficult, but it's really explaining the benefit that ultimately they're going to get over time for everyone.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's key. Implementing those new operational procedures. Well, one other thing that most people tend to overlook is that AI, the delivery of AI is unlike traditional technologies. It introduces new processes in the life cycle of going from idea to a product or to a service. So when you think about it, so think about data right now, what we're talking about, right? So now we have to, in the past, we bought software, you
Right.
installed it, then you used it, right? Now what we're saying is that software is already there. It's the data now that makes that software useful, right? So for that software to be super useful to you, which is the AI, your data must be in a state that you can derive value from it, right?
Yeah,
And
but
that,
isn't that? I mean, and I'm thinking about again because I'm simplistic. I'm not as smart as you.
Yeah.
That's for certain. I'm thinking of it again back to my Excel example of Microsoft doesn't tell you how to go about and what you should do with Excel. They just say, here's this platform, here's rows, columns, you figure it out, and that's all. It's just given to you, right?
Yes.
And you're having to shove stuff into there. So, in my mind, what you were just kind of getting at seemed very similar. Where, okay, AI is a platform, but it's still really dependent upon you to kind of figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Is that?
Oh yeah, yeah,
so-
and that's why the strategy is important, and that's why also when we're talking about frameworks of how and where you apply AI, that's important because the same framework that you use for determining whether you need Excel, right? We need to distill the concept of AI to that, right? So when you start to look at AI as I was saying just a minute ago, that it's pretty much the software that's driven by data,
Right.
right? And you start to look at that as a capability, right? And having a framework that tells you, hey, look, this is how you look at opportunities to apply that capability, right? It's in very much the same ways we look for. These are the opportunities for you to apply Excel,
Right.
right? Makes the way we think about AI, the way we implement AI, far much more simpler than I think the prevailing situation we are in right now, where it's a bunch of examples and people really can't figure out how to go from example to applying it to their business.
Right. Because again, if I'm a manager, if I'm on the board or at the management level, C-level guys, and you come in and I'm not going to think twice about you making a recommendation to implement Excel. I'll be like, duh, of
Yeah.
course. There's everyone kind of gets it, they know it. So, but if you're coming in and you're saying, hey, look, you just can't come in and say AI and it all works. You're coming in saying, you guys need to put some framework around this first so that we can be successful.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do actually is like saying that we're not creating a new framework. We're just providing you ways to think about AI as a strategic capability, so you can just leverage the same framework you have right now.
Okay, all right.
Right?
All right, so you're okay.
So and that's pretty much how we distill AI. Like, look at it as a strategic capability that can do A, B, C, D, E, right? So when you look at it that way, you can use the same decision-making framework that you use to decide whether you needed Excel,
Right.
right?
Okay.
For this specific task in the delivery of your service or product to the customer, right? So you need performance. You need to be faster because you're having bottlenecks, right? One thing you could do is hire more people, right?
Right.
But one thing you could do is use AI and use automation, right? So, but it's still the same framework of how you think about applying these tools. And with AI, it's not any different, right? It's not any different.
I just, and I'm not experienced enough to know, but I just, I see these projects being just, big and expensive, and, you just made the example of, do I hire 10 people? I'm like, well, maybe it's less expensive that way. I don't know. I would hope not, right? But can you give me an idea around that, on where application of AI really kind of falls on the cost benefit curve?
I think they're not necessarily expensive, right? In the sense that in most of the cases, you already have the data, right? And the asset that drives your AI is usually locked in your IP. That's your data, and
Right.
you're just now using it to either predict, prescribe, or describe, right? In ways that improve your efficiencies. So it's not necessarily that, but it differs from project to project, right? So if you have like something that needs expensive robots, for example, right, then that's going to be a lot more expensive than
Right.
something that that you're simply trying to predict revenue, or you're trying to predict production of a well based on prior data,
Right.
right? So I think there's a spectrum there, and I don't want to just point it and at saying like it's going to be expensive or it's going to be cheap. I think it just depends on your implementation.
It was a bit of an unfair question, to be honest with you.
So, but along those same lines, what do companies need internally? So we talked a little bit about culture a minute ago on the culture to be successful, but do they need a large IT staff, or how are they?
Well,
what is needed for a company to actually be able to use and implement AI I'll say in the field, but in the office?
yeah. So we hear that a lot, right? And so what we advise is you got to one, assess the maturity of your technology team, right? Can they deliver this? If you have a technology team. The second is assessing your capabilities, and the third is assessing your capacity to do that. For the companies that have an internal technology team, so that's easy. You can identify those. Like, do I have any data scientists on my team, right? Do I even have the data? Do we have people who are capable of handling large amounts of data, right? And based on your capabilities, you can make the decisions on whether you need to augment those capabilities or not. The second question we also get is largely around build versus buy, right? So build, you got to have the capabilities to do that. Should I buy? And what I recommend is that, well, you know what? There's a lot of effort that has been put in a lot of AI technologies right now. There's some, and you don't need to replicate that work. If you can buy. And if you're capable of building and you have the capacity to do so, then you can go ahead and build. The important thing is that's one aspect of it, so like an organizational aspect. There's also a process aspect, right? Because now with AI, you're introducing new actors in the process. So
Okay.
for example, when we're looking at data, it's no longer just data, right? You probably need to have your legal team to look at the legality of that data. You probably need to have people look at experts, right? So whether it's internal subject matter experts on bias, right? You probably need to have other people look at the trust. How much can we trust this data to help us make critical decisions?
Right.
Right. So and those are just three examples I'm giving. On bias, can go even deeper in that, right? Because there could be technology bias in the data.
Right.
I know in the energy industry, I mean, you sit in a room with a bunch of engineers, and there is all sorts of different ways to analyze one number, right? In terms of its reliability, right? And so all those things are packed in your data. And if you don't do all that work up front to try and figure all that out, it's going to manifest itself in the results that the AI give you.
Okay.
Right? And that can lead to either reliable or unreliable AI. So there's both organizational changes that you need to look at, There's the build versus buy decisions, and then lastly there is the operational, the process decisions, and most importantly, just training, having people understand what AI is, what its impact is, and having people being able to work side by side with AI is pretty important, because you start running into questions of, okay, if I'm working with an AI, with a piece of AI, and it has made a decision, and I'm doubting it,
Right.
what's my process for that? Right? Do I defer to it, or do I win? Right? So you get all these new things that are new constructs, new issues that are being introduced by AI that you gotta solve for.
Yeah.
And it's not, and so when we say it's unlike old technology where you bought Microsoft Outlook and you put it on a desk and that was it, you got your IT guy to set it up and then you leave. No, this is ongoing, because even when you get the data, right, you're going to be getting more data. You got to put in place a system to refresh that data to make sure your AI is current and it's giving you more current. You're able to make decisions based on the most current data, right? And those are processes that most organizations right now are not designed for.
Okay. No, it's fascinating to me, and we're talking a lot about data certainly, and prior to the show we were kind of chatting along out before coming in studio. this worldview of AI, and is it really a buzzword, or is it on the other end of the spectrum, Skynet? Like Elon Musk, he's very, be very careful. He doesn't like artificial intelligence, and what you're explaining doesn't sound like that to me. It sounds like it's very much a tool in the toolbox, as opposed to the machines are taking over.
Yeah. So, so I'll tell you an interesting story. We changed our curriculum to actually lead with that, primarily because we had one executive say, "Oh, so now when the AI can do everything, right?" And it got us thinking that, well, you know what? There's a lot of people who think that it can do everything. And what we really need to teach is that AI can do very limited tasks. In most cases, just one task, it just does it well, right? So when you think about it, there is artificial narrow intelligence, there's artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence. I'll kind of explain what that is, because it's very important. Artificial intelligence is where we are right now, where AI can do one thing, it can do one thing well. It can identify pictures of cats, right? If you give it a dog, all it knows is that it's not a cat.
Okay.
It doesn't know it's a dog until you show a different AI that does that you show with dogs, right?
Okay.
So you can do one thing, really well. I know there are some that will maybe do one or two, three things that are combined together, but for the most part, it's very narrow what it can do, which is artificial narrow intelligence. There's also the next level of intelligence, which is artificial general intelligence, which is when artificial intelligence can think like we do. We can put constructs about the world around us, right? As human beings, we are not there yet. There's a lot of debate on when we'll get there. Some people say decades, some people say never, some people say next year, right? But this still, we're not there.
What do you say?
When do we get there?
I'll leave that to the researchers in the college labs, right? But I think we're not there. I think it's going to be a while before we get there. And then there's a large one, which is the artificial super intelligence, which scares everybody, which is when intelligence is smarter than us, right? So we still have to get to general intelligence, and if we say it's decades away, so yeah, we're still maybe decades away from the super intelligence that we talk about. The important thing right now is understanding that AI is pretty much a specific tool. It's pretty narrow in what it can do, and when you think about it that way, it's actually a big benefit when you start to think about connecting AI to your business strategy, right? So when hey, I have AI that's capable of answering questions, right? And capable of answering questions about this specific topic about human resource benefits, right? Then you know where to apply that AI right away, right? I have AI that's able to predict failures of my equipment, right?
Right.
It can predict other failures, like when I'm going to catch a cold, but it knows when this piece of an electrical submersible pump, when this is going to fail, right?
Aaron's going to fail next Thursday. He's going to be sick and out of the office.
I feel it now.
So there's a huge advantage. There's actually a huge advantage to understanding that it's limited, because when you understand that, then you know it's a tool. Then it's you now have a finite a number of opportunities where you can apply that.
And that's really helpful for me to understand. Because again, when we started this discussion, I was making mention there, this comparing it to big data and this, idea, right? And how do you really operationalize it? But now you're saying, hey, no, it's very specific. You can task it to accomplish certain goals. And in my mind, that's your value point, is you're doing or creating operational results.
Yes.
Very definitive, and not some pie in the sky sort of ivory tower. It's going to help us 5 years down the road because somehow, some way, we're going to be better.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I mean, when you understand how that is narrow and deep, then the opportunities or the business cases where you can apply it becomes pretty finite. And when it's finite, then people can grasp that a lot better than when we talk about all this pie in the sky capabilities that it has, which are true when aggregated, right? So, for example, when you think about a self-driving car, right? It's aggregating a lot of different AI, but each AI is great at doing one thing well.
Drive the
but
car.
then when you aggregate, because it's also identifying trees, it's identifying people, it's identifying other cars,
Cats.
It's identifying
I got cats.
right? Breaking distances, it's doing a lot of different things. But when you aggregate all the different AI together, then you create that self-driving driving car.
It drives.
Yeah.
Well, but again, that's ultimately a very results-oriented task in and of itself.
Yes.
Drive the car from here to here.
Yes.
Don't hit the cat.
Yeah.
Got it.
Pretty
Or
definitely.
if you're not a cat lover, accelerate.
Oh yeah. So
Sorry if there's any cat lovers out there. It's my bad.
actually, that's a good example, right? I mean, because we're trying to get to how do you get from how do you connect AI to strategy, right? So your requirement is go from A to B, don't hit this specific object.
Right.
So what do you need, right? So what you need is your AI to be able to identify specific objects, and when it does, then make a corrective action, right?
Yeah.
So and that's pretty clear in terms of a strategic capability. The capability being, hey, look, it's an object identifier, right? So whether that object identifier was a person sitting on the hood, right?
Yeah.
And looking out for specific object and saying, no, we're about to hit this object, right? Or whether that person is replaced by AI that automatically does that, right? The capability is still the same. So that's what I'm talking about. Like right now, my mission is to really help distill it so people can start thinking about it in those terms.
Yeah, it's the I guess now the application across almost certainly industries, but is just so, in my mind, vast, right? Because it's not just the car, right? It's the Amazons of the world absorbing every bit of information for their goals around understanding like buyer preferences or something.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a very specific goal. They want to be able to sell product to you.
Yeah, personalization.
Right. So I just find that wholly fascinating. If we can narrow in a little bit on oil and gas, because that is our audience.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about how AI and what innovation does is going to help out these oil and gas guys. Or I don't know if you have any experience on the investor side. I don't know if you can speak to either, to one or both of them.
Okay. I think they're all related. So So when you look at the oil and gas field, right, I can name two distinct opportunities. So there's operational efficiencies. So as we talked about, predictable maintenance and
Right.
things like that,
Yeah.
right? But there's also opportunities, especially in production prediction,
Okay.
right? Leveraging all the past data that you have about a reservoir, right? And about past wells, about the drilling strategies, right? In order to find the most optimal drilling strategy that maximizes production, whether it's IP X90, right? You can use AI for that. And we actually did a project that was the last year. Public oil and gas data is pretty dirty, right?
Okay.
It's
Yeah. Right.
it's pretty dirty. I think we all know that,
Yeah,
right?
just put out there.
And that's why we need the DIs and all these companies to kind of clean that for us, right?
Nice plug.
But when you have good data, right? It's actually pretty fascinating what it can show you. So you could look at two wells, right, and see they already have the same strategy, but they both produce differently when they should produce almost the same because they're really close to each other, right? And with that project, for example, we're able to find that, like, man, the timing zone for one engineer was really low, right? We had this timing zone score. The more the more you're in zone, we give you a higher score,
Okay.
and the less you are, we give you a less score. And that was able to tell us, hey, look, that's the reason why these two wells are producing differently, right? So you optimize on your timing zone and start to focus on that. So around
Because that would translate into real dollars right there.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so when I say those two are correlated, because now when these companies, when you're able to predict better,
Yeah.
right, either operational efficiencies or predict production and drilling strategies, then obviously on the investor side, there's a great deal of interest in that.
I imagine guys are pretty interested in banging on your door saying, hey, help us out here.
Yeah, there's also supply chain optimization, right? So, being cost efficient with how you deliver product on site, right?
Yeah.
And how you predict specific product running out, and the process for ordering that to make sure, hey, when product runs out, it's already on the trailer and it's already set up.
Like sand.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or we're moving to this logistics world of sand moving and getting it there as much as you need, when it's there, all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And what's the most optimal way of arranging that on a truck bed, right? AI can help you with that, because if you're recording all that data, right, AI can tell you, like, hey, you actually complete the job faster, you complete it more efficient with less people when things are laid out this way.
Interesting. That's awesome.
Right.
I feel like from the beginning part of our conversation to now, we kind of got that construct and that framework that we were talking about, and now I've got ideas.
Right? Seriously. You start thinking about all these things going, again, if you can collect very specific data, and also this is off topic from oil and gas somewhat, but I think is relevant, and you tell me otherwise, but my understanding is that part of this whole deal with Tesla is that you can buy your insurance through there, and they've partnered up with a major insurance provider. But what the car is doing is it is literally collecting all of your data around your driving habits, how fast you accelerate, how hard you bank and turn, and what G's you pull, and it all goes into your driving habits. Then goes into, I think, is collected for insurance, so that they can in turn model the appropriate policy against the type of driver you are, because ultimately the car is apparently the best.
Yeah. So that's personalization, right? Used in a different way. So collecting data right? And personalizing it in a different way. So in this case, what Tesla is doing, from my understanding, is largely that, hey, look, our customers are paying too much for insurance, right? And the models that are being used are just generic based on a broader population.
Okay,
We
all
think because we have the data for specific users or for specific drivers, I think internally they probably modeled it and find out like, oh yeah, no, you know what, our drivers are actually much safer, because one of the things they're talking about is the autopilot.
right.
So now I don't know much about it, but so presumably it's safer, so that lowers the risk. So it shouldn't be there shouldn't be in a high risk pool, right? So basically that's the idea. Whether it's right or not, I mean that's a different story. But the most important thing here is the fact that you can collect this data.
Yeah, that's what I was
right?
getting at. Really, was just this whole notion about it's this capacity to collect data,
Yes.
right? And I think about it, either your car is doing it or your phone, your device is doing it, and and as you integrate in, like I think about guys out in the field, right? Who when they go up to the wellhead and they pull the ticket and they write it on out and they scribble it on out, versus having something there, a sensor that's hooked into your phone, and now you're not getting your crappy data from something scribbled on a piece of paper, but you're actually getting it from a device that's feeding it into an overall model that you would want to use potentially
Yes.
to put as part of your data set for your AI.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know. I know. Earlier you had asked me about digital transformation, right? So digital transformation is very, very important, because you cannot do AI without that, right? And we
Look
just
at me, I can't. I
we
hit
can
on
just
something.
we can just go back a little bit on what that means, right? So when you look at digital transformation, there's digitization, which is the process of taking like your old documents and creating ebooks and scanning and most preferably taking your logs that were on paper and putting them in Excel, converting them to Excel, right? So that is very important, because now you are putting, when we're talking about preparing data and having it in a way where it's appropriate for AI, that's one step, right? Because the AI is not going to work with logbooks that are in some folder, some binder somewhere on some filing cabinet, right? So digitization, pretty important, right? And it's a very important part of digital transformation, right? Which is how an organization goes from non-digital to being fully digital. And when we think about transformation, we're talking about how from an organizational standpoint, right? We set up an organization with people who are working in order to produce products or services that you deliver to a customer. So we have people work, that's products and services, and that's customer engagement. Those three parts of a business, right? So if you digitize all those parts, so whether it's how people are working, which is the example you were giving me, with hey, you can now collect data with your phone. So now if you go from the physical logs where people are writing down on paper, but now when they go out to the field, they have an app that's collecting data. Now it's in a digital format. You probably have an internal social network where conversations can take place and decisions can be made, which means we can mine that data to see how decisions were made in the past, so we can apply it to future decisions and make better decisions. And when you talk about product, right? We can apply data to that. So it's either you can digitize your products if they're digitizable, right? Or having the data feedback from the customers that can help you in bettering your product, right? So that's the product part. And then there's the marketing and engagement part, right? Which is what most people think digital transformation is about. It's like, oh yeah, now we have digital marketing, right? It's just one of the three, right? Where you're engaging and you're marketing differently. But in doing so, now you have the opportunity to capture that data that actually influences the other two, right? The way you work, the way the products you deliver, right? And so that's pretty important. So when you start looking at your organization from that point and saying, hey, we need to transform to digital transformation, because only when we are there, when we have that data, can we get to doing some interesting things with AI, right?
Has that been your recommendation to some firms? You come in
yeah.
and you're like, hey, you've got to step it up here.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It is because if you don't have that data, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can do. But that's not to say that not having the data precludes you from doing AI, right? I mean, because there's still a lot of public data sets there that are
Gotcha.
there, like Frac Focus, right? Yeah. Public data sets that are there, you can leverage. You can still do that, but where you actually get a competitive advantage, right, is now leveraging the data from your customer that the person next to you does not have, right? And applying that and getting a competitive advantage. But digital transformation is pretty key in being able to set yourself up for AI.
I'm sitting here just like, you're pretty passionate about this. This is actually, it's really cool. I mean, it's like, man, every time you say something, I think of another question. I'm like, well, what about this? And you're all over it. So that's awesome. Look, we are running a little bit over on our time. Not that we're really constrained on time, but being very cognizant of your time. And before we go, I didn't know if there's anything else that we wanted to bring up that we haven't thought about or mentioned or.
No, I think, like I said, I think at least I started this discussion in one spot and was able to get brought along, and now that the idea fairy's going on my head. But I would just ask, one, thank you, Tom, and then two, did we miss any question that your clients ask you all the time and you're like, man, I think they're going to ask me about this?
Yeah, I mean, what does our audience want to know? It's more around again towards oil and gas, but
yeah, I mean,
not to put you on the spot.
We've covered some questions. I mean, obviously the idea of what can it do, right, is a pretty most asked question, and dispelling the notion that it can do everything is very key, because I think once you dispel that notion, the understanding that it can do a few things becomes really powerful, right, in how you can start to think about how to use it as a tool that's good at specific things. Other questions we get are around governance, like what both micro and macro, right? So starting with the macro, right, which is what are governments doing in terms of governing AI, and I think what's currently happening is that everybody's still trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Everybody's still trying to figure it out, because I'm tracking bills that have been proposed in Congress to see what's happening there. I think there's still just proposals right now.
Are they well informed?
I hope they are, because
I would submit no.
Some of the implications could be pretty significant. But internally, though, which is the macro, right? I think it's pretty important that when you think about AI, start to put some governing structures around it, largely to protect yourself, right? I mean, we don't know how it's all going to play out in terms of, hey, if you use unreliable data to make certain decisions, right, and it affects somebody,
right,
like what the repercussions for that are. So this is kind of the things you got to start thinking about. The other question that I get is around training, like, and who is going to lose their jobs, that kind of question. And honestly, I know there are a lot of camps here. There's a lot of camps that say, well, everybody's going to be replaced. And then there's camps that say, well, nobody's going to lose their job, right? I am in the middle. We don't know. It just depends what it is. If you're replacing using robotic process automation, right, you could literally replace a person, right?
Yeah.
And so for me I don't think it's responsible for me to say, well, nobody's going to get replaced. Maybe you might shift that person to do another job, right? Like a great example is the ATM with the banks,
right? That
people who were tellers just got to sell more products, right? Which is the kind of like the outcome that we probably are looking for. That would be great, at least in my mind. But so we don't really know that. What gets replaced, I think it's going to differ from place to place, implementation to implementation on what happens there. The other thing is about skilling. Like, what do I need to do with training the organization? I think right now everybody's focusing on training the technology team, which is great, right? But the next step there is training the people who can take the technology and get it to the staff's desktops, right? So, and the reason why I think that's pretty key is that I think there is a significant number of companies that have dabbled in AI and they've had all these great demos and great prototypes,
Right.
but I'm just not seeing that get out of the engineering teams, right, onto people's desktop where it's actually working, right?
Well, and that's just it. I mean, you brought it up before. Is that it's very important that management understands. You're being more successful because management understands, and that's potentially a key part of it. Is like, hey, not just to my players getting stuff to their desktop, but I want it on my desktop so I actually can see this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and part of it is like understanding that not every data scientist can also take a product to production,
Right.
can deploy it, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the assumption that, oh yeah, they've done it, so now we got to see it and everybody's going to use it. So you need all these other new capabilities and train those people who are currently right now really great at how to take something in the IT department and deploying it to everybody's desktop, right?
Do you ever
train those people in order to get that?
Do you ever run across in a consulting engagement, you run across the data scientist who doesn't really understand why they need you to come in? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? There's somebody is the local expert who kind of feels threatened a little bit by the other expert coming on in and saying, hey.
So preferably we're coming in before the data scientist.
Okay.
So we are able to lay out the plan for the company to say, hey, you need a data scientist for here, and this is their role. It's clearly defined.
Gotcha.
And to support the data scientist, you're going to need this and this people. And when you do that, then now you're setting up the data scientist for success. Right, when you understand their capabilities and what they can and cannot do, then when they're successful, the people who are supporting them are successful, then the organization is successful.
So when you come in, you kind of go through a process. You go through I know I said I was going to wrap this up, but I'm not, because I'm curious now. Do you do like a sort of a quarterly maintenance after you guys have completed something, or you're engaging a company sort of on an ongoing basis to make sure that they're staying on the rails, right?
I mean, it's an option in the contract.
Well,
will they pay me for that?
Oh, yeah. It's an option in the contract, depending on how it's structured.
Okay.
But we are hoping that they can take that offer, right? That they can take that part of the contract.
Yeah. Well, I think that they would. I mean, just if you're showing positive results and get better at it.
Yeah.
So.
And because the background is. Because I have a business and a technology background, I can marry those two, right? Mm-hmm. And in order to give that kind of feedback on an ongoing basis when we are making assessments, and so it's not like we are a business consultant who leaves because now it's the technology folks coming in, right? Because of both those backgrounds. I can also assess whether the deployments are happening correctly, whether the technology lifecycle is being implemented correctly with the right people in the right roles to position the business for success.
Smart guy.
Nailed it. I booked him.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. As we now, I'm going to start actually to wrap this on up, but. Tom, tell me or tell everybody listening how do they get a hold of you? And we brought up a lot of information around AI, and they're interested. How do they get a hold of you?
So go to our website, innovationillustrated.com. Think of Sports Illustrated, but this is Innovation Illustrated. Innovationillustrated.com. There's a form to fill there.
There's not a picture of you in a bikini.
Yeah, I was going to say, what kind of centerfolds are on this?
There's a form to fill there. You can fill in that form with your needs, and we'll contact you.
Awesome. Okay. If there's anybody out there who has any questions that you have of here at EnerCom at least, or of ourselves, or of Tom and innovation that we can pass along, the email address here is ogpodcast@enercominc.com. Tom, once again, thank you for being here today. This was hugely informative for me. Makes me think of how much I just really don't know. But,
Well, thanks for having me. This was great.
all right, man.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.